My husband died telling me we were penniless, but $25 million was buried right beneath our estate. I never suspected anyone could lie so easily on their deathbed. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if, for a second, you feel like this story sounds familiar to you, all I ask is that you leave a like and subscribe. It will help me keep letting it all out. My name is Eleanor Ellie Johnson. I'm 72 years old, and I live alone in an old stone farmhouse on the outskirts of rural Pennsylvania. The house always smells of dry rosemary and years of accumulated loneliness. My hands, stained by the veins that show through like maps of pain, tremble every morning as I prepare coffee that no one else will drink. I wear the same faded floral apron my mother gave me 40 years ago. The flowers were red then. Now they are the color of sorrow. I wake up every day at 6, open the wooden shutters that creak like my knees, and look out at the road, waiting to see someone who never arrives. This morning, like all the others, the phone remained silent. My children, Ethan and Olivia, live in New York City with their prosperous families, their stock market investments, their accounts full of dollars they've never been willing to share with me. Ethan manages investment funds for multi-million-dollar corporations. Olivia is married to a man who brags about his crypto holdings and a fortune that grows every year. But for me, their mother, there are always excuses. Mom, we don't have time. Mom, the kids have activities. Mom, you understand we have important commitments. Always commitments more important than an old woman who gave them life. But yesterday, something changed. I received a text message from Olivia that chilled my blood. Mom, we need to talk. It's about the house. We'll be there Saturday. Nothing more. Not a, how are you? Not an, we love you. Just that cold, dry sentence, like the parched East Coast clay in mid-August. Last night, while rummaging through the memory drawer for the few photographs I have left of when we were a real family, I found a picture of us on their wedding day. George was hugging me around the waist, smiling that smile I later learned was fake. I was wearing a blue dress that had cost all my savings back then. I looked happy. I looked foolish. On the back of the photograph, in George's shaky handwriting, was something I had never noticed before. The treasure is where it all started. Behind the old barn, EJ, my initials, Eleanor Johnson. My heart raced faster than it had since the day they told me George had suffered the heart attack. What treasure? What was he talking about? He died 3 years ago telling me we had nothing, that he had spent all our savings on bad investments, that I would have to make do with the pitiful Social Security check I was left with. I stayed awake all night, holding that photograph between my wrinkled fingers, feeling the paper dampen with my tears. I remembered the times I borrowed money from the neighbors to buy medicine, the times I ate only toast and cheap margarine just to make it to the end of the month, the times my children visited and mocked my poverty. Mom, you should sell this old house, Ethan would say, looking with contempt at the cracks in the walls. It's not worth much anyway. And Olivia would nod, already calculating how many dollars she could squeeze out of the sale for her own stock market investments. But they never suspected that beneath their feet, under these stones they despised, there might be something more valuable than all their stocks and crypto combined. This morning, I grabbed the old shovel from the barn and walked to the back of the property, where the grass grows wild and centuries-old oak trees stand guard like silent witnesses to all our family secrets. The barn has been abandoned since we sold the last of the beef cattle 10 years ago. The wooden beams are slowly rotting, but the structure still stands. Just like me. Around noon, I started digging. I dug for 3 days straight, always at dawn when the morning mist hid me from the neighbors' curious eyes. My hands, no longer used to heavy labor, filled with blisters that burst and bled onto the dry earth. But something inside me, a strength I thought was lost forever, urged me to keep excavating. The shovel hit stones that sounded hollow, as if the earth itself were lying to me. Every scoop was a reproach for all the years I lived believing we were poor, that George had lost everything in failed investments, that I was an economic burden on my children. On the 4th day, when I had dug a hole almost 6 feet deep, the shovel struck something metallic. The sound resonated differently, more solid, more real than all the broken promises I had heard in my life. With trembling hands, I cleared the damp earth until I found the edge of an old safe. the kind used before modern banks with their digital systems and cryptocurrencies existed. It took me 2 more hours to get it out completely. It weighed so much I had to drag it to the house, marking a furrow in the dirt like a wound bleeding secrets. The safe had a number combination that at first seemed impossible to decipher, but then I remembered our wedding date, 08/15, 1970. When it opened, the air escaped with a hiss that sounded like the final breath of an agonizing lie. Inside were gold bars, small but heavy like guilt. Documents for investments in companies I recognized from the financial newspapers, stock certificates for multi-million-dollar corporations, deeds to properties in Manhattan and Boston that I never knew existed, and cash. Thousands and thousands of dollars and euros, organized in perfect bundles as if George had been preparing to flee. I sat on my kitchen floor, surrounded by more wealth than I had seen in my entire life, and cried. Not with joy. I cried with pure rage. The kind of rage that surges when you realize you've been the fool of your own story for decades. $25 million. That was the approximate figure according to the documents I reviewed one by one with my reading glasses. $25 million that George had accumulated during our marriage, while I mended the same skirt 3 times to last another winter. $25 million he had hidden while I asked for credit at the local store to buy medicine for his diabetes. I remembered all the times I asked him if we could afford a small vacation, just a weekend on the coast. "Eleanor, don't be irresponsible," he would say while reading the financial section of the newspaper. "We have to be responsible with money. We are not rich." And I believed him, because a good wife always believes her husband, right? I remembered when Olivia got married and asked me for help with the wedding. "Mom, I just need $5,000. It's for the dress and the flowers." I sold my grandmother's jewelry, those small pearls that were the only thing of value I owned, to give her the money. Meanwhile, George had enough capital buried to buy all the jewelry stores in the county. I remembered when Ethan wanted to study for a master's in finance in London. "Dad, it's my chance to work with international investments, to manage millionaire funds." George flatly refused. "We don't have that kind of money, son. You'll have to find a scholarship or forget the dream." Ethan blamed me for years, saying that if I had worked more, if I had contributed more to the family, he could have studied abroad. Our entire family life had been a lie built on my ignorance and my submission. George handled all the finances, all the important decisions, all the secrets. I was just the woman who cooked, cleaned, and kept quiet when he yelled at me for spending too much on groceries. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the empty house with a flashlight, looking at every corner as if for the first time. The cracked walls my children criticized so much, the broken tiled floor I had tried to repair myself with cheap cement, the old furniture I had inherited from my mother. All of this had been my golden cage, built with lies and maintained by my own resignation. At dawn, I made a decision. I put all the money and documents into several plastic bags and hid them in different places in the house. Some bundles under the mattress, others inside empty canning jars in the pantry, the gold bars wrapped in old rags inside the linen closet. Then I drove to Harrisburg, to the office of the lawyer who had handled George's estate case. Mr. Thomas Riley was an older man, one of those who inspires confidence with his gray mustache and metal glasses. I told him an edited version of the truth, that I had found some forgotten documents of my husband and needed to regularize the legal situation. "Mrs. Johnson," he said after reviewing the papers, "your husband was much more cunning than he appeared. These investments are perfectly legal, but he kept them in separate accounts that you were unaware of. Technically, as his widow, all of this belongs to you now." I paid his fees immediately. With cash I pulled out of my purse as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Mr. Riley asked no questions. Good lawyers never do. That afternoon, back at my house, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat on the porch to wait. Tomorrow, Ethan and Olivia would arrive to talk about the house. But now I held cards they didn't know existed. For the first time in years, I truly smiled. On Saturday, they arrived in their black BMW, the same car Ethan had bought with the dividends from his international fund investments. I watched them from my bedroom window as they got out with that calculated haste of important people who have urgent matters to resolve. Olivia was wearing a wool coat that cost more than my Social Security check for 3 months. Ethan was wearing one of those suits that rich men use to intimidate the poor. They didn't come alone. They brought Sophia, Ethan's wife, a woman thin as a wire and just as cold, who worked at a bank managing the wealth of millionaire clients. And Mark, Olivia's husband, that man who always boasts about his crypto and investments in tech startups, came too. I let them ring the doorbell 3 times before opening. When I finally did, neither greeted me with a kiss or a hug. Ethan simply pushed the door open and walked in as if he owned the place. "Mom, we need to talk," Olivia said without even taking off her coat. "It's about your situation." I invited them into the living room, the same room where they had played as children, where I had read them stories and patched up their scraped knees. Now they looked at it with the contempt of someone evaluating a property for a quick sale. "This house is too big for you," Ethan began, sitting on the edge of the sofa as if afraid of getting dirty. "You can't maintain it anymore. Look at the leaks, the damp walls, the garden that's a mess." Sophia opened a folder she had brought and spread several documents on the coffee table. "We've been consulting with real estate experts," she said, with that professional voice she used to explain complex investments to her clients. "This property, in its current state, could sell for about $150,000. It's not much, but it would allow you to buy a small apartment in town and still have some capital left to live comfortably." "Comfortably," I repeated, tasting the word on my tongue as if it were poison. Mark nodded enthusiastically. He was a man who had made a fortune flipping properties before getting into the crypto world. "It's a perfect opportunity, Eleanor. The market is favorable for sellers. And we could help you with the paperwork. Make sure you don't get ripped off." Olivia leaned forward with that fake smile she had perfected since she was a teenager. "Mom, we know it's hard to make these decisions, but you have to be practical. What are you going to do when you can't climb the stairs anymore? When you have a medical emergency here, alone, with no one to help you?" I served them coffee in the good cups, the porcelain ones I had kept for years for special occasions that never arrived. As they drank, I studied them as if it were the first time I was seeing them. Ethan had inherited his father's green eyes, but not his ability to hide his greed. Olivia had my hands, but she used them to gesticulate while talking about money with a passion she had never shown for anything else. "And of course," Ethan continued, "we would take care of all the legal paperwork. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing. Just sign where we tell you and start your new life." Their new life, I thought, as I listened to them calculate my future as if it were a stock market investment. For an hour, they kept talking about square footage, appraisals, notaries, and bank accounts. They spoke of me as if I weren't present, as if I were a senile old woman incapable of making my own decisions. Sophia pulled a gold calculator from her designer purse and started crunching numbers. "With $150,000, she said while typing, "you could buy a 60-square-meter apartment in the center of town for about $80,000. You'd have $70,000 left to invest in conservative funds that would give you a monthly income of about $300 on top of your Social Security." $300, I repeated. For a woman who raised 2 children, who worked 30 years cleaning other people's houses, who cared for her sick husband until the very end. Mark cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Well, Eleanor, we have to be realistic. It's not like you saved much over all these years. Dad George always used to say that." "What did my husband say?" I asked with a calm that surprised even me. "That financially things had been difficult," Olivia mumbled. "That he had suffered significant losses in some investments. That you were practically out of savings." I stood up slowly and walked to the window. From there, I could see the spot where I had been digging, where I had found the fortune my own children believed didn't exist. The hole was already filled, covered with new grass I had sown to hide the evidence of my discovery. "Do you know what hurts the most?" I said without turning around. "It's not that you want to sell my house. It's not that you treat me like a burden. What hurts the most is that you haven't even asked what I want." Ethan sighed with that exaggerated patience used with spoiled children. "Mom, please. We are trying to help you. You can't live here forever, refusing to accept reality." "Reality?" I turned to look at them. "What exactly is my reality, according to you?" Olivia exchanged a look with her brother. Mom, you are an elderly woman, alone, with limited resources. This house is falling apart and you have neither the money nor the energy to maintain it. It's time for you to be practical. Practical, I repeated again. That word they had used like a hammer to crush all my dreams, all my aspirations, all the times I had wanted something more than basic survival. Mark shifted in his seat. As a crypto expert, he was accustomed to dealing with virtual fortunes, but seemed uncomfortable with real emotions. Eleanor, we understand it's a difficult change, but sometimes painful decisions have to be made for everyone's good. For everyone's good? I asked. Or for your good? The silence that followed was so heavy it could be cut with a knife. Finally, Sophia closed the calculator and put away the documents. I think you need time to think about it, Eleanor. But not much time. These market opportunities don't last forever. When they left, promising to return the following week for my final answer, I sat in my empty living room, surrounded by the echo of their words. They had been in my house for 2 hours, and not once had they asked how I was feeling, if I needed anything, if my health was okay. They had only seen numbers, square footage, market value, return on investment. That night, I opened one of the canning jars where I had hidden some of the cash and counted $10,000. I placed them on the kitchen table and stared at them for hours. It was more money than my children believed I had seen in my entire life, and it was only an insignificant fraction of what I truly owned. For the first time in decades, I started to plan. On Monday morning, I drove to Harrisburg, to the branch of the First National Bank where I had kept my savings account for 20 years. The same account that never had more than $300. The same one where I had religiously deposited my Social Security check every month while living like a pauper in my own house. Ms. Alice Brown, the branch manager, knew me well. For years, she had witnessed my financial troubles. The times I had come in to ask for small loans for urgent repairs or medicines. She greeted me with that professional smile she reserved for clients with few resources. Mrs. Johnson, how can I help you today? I took a folder from my purse with some of the documents I had found. Just a small sample. 2 shares of AT&T, a certificate of deposit for $50,000, and one of the smaller gold bars wrapped in a handkerchief. Alice opened the folder, and her expression completely changed. The color drained from her face as she reviewed the documents, verified numbers, and consulted her computer. Her hands began to tremble slightly when she unwrapped the gold bar. Mrs. Johnson, these documents, where did you— They are from my late husband, I said with complete tranquility. I just found them among his papers. Apparently, he was a better investor than I thought. Alice immediately called the regional director, a stocky man named Mr. David Miller, who came down to meet me personally. Over the next 2 hours, financial experts verified the authenticity of the documents, consulted international databases, and made calls to New York. Everything was authentic. Everything was legal. Everything was mine. Mrs. Johnson, David said with a respect I had never heard in his voice, according to our preliminary calculations, you are the owner of a considerable estate. These stocks alone are worth more than $2 million, and that's not counting the gold or the other assets you may have. I explained that there were more documents at home, that I needed time to calmly review everything. David personally assigned 2 financial advisors to help me manage my new economic situation. They treated me as if I were the Queen of England. We opened new accounts, private accounts with access codes only I knew. We transferred some funds to have immediate liquidity. For the first time in my life, I heard words like wealth management, portfolio diversification, and tax planning directed at me. On Tuesday, I hired Clara Hamilton, a young lawyer specializing in family and estate law. Her office was in the downtown historic district, in a restored building that smelled of old books and new ambition. Clara was 35, her black hair pulled back in a perfect bun, and eyes that seemed capable of unraveling any lie. I told her the truth, the whole truth. George's fake poverty, the buried fortune, my children's plans to sell my house for less than its real value. Clara took notes on a digital tablet while I spoke, occasionally nodding with expressions that ranged from indignation to professional fascination. Mrs. Johnson, she said when I finished my story, What your children are attempting to do could be considered financial abuse of an elder, but you have very powerful legal tools to defend yourself. We started working on a strategy. First, Clara would manage the transfer of the rest of the assets to secure accounts. Second, we would get an official appraisal of the property from independent experts. Third, we would draft a new will that reflected my true wishes. Have you thought about what you want to do with your estate? Clara asked, while reviewing the documents for the properties George had bought in my name without telling me. For the first time in weeks, I smiled with genuine joy. Yes, I want to create a foundation for elderly women who have been abandoned or mistreated by their families. I want them to have a place where they can live with dignity, where no one treats them as burdens or nuisances. Clara looked up from her tablet. That is beautiful, Mrs. Johnson, and perfectly legal. A foundation would also have significant tax benefits. Over the next few weeks, while my children called occasionally to ask if I had made a decision about the house thing, I worked silently with Clara to build my new life. We transferred the $25 million into diversified accounts at different banks. We bought more stocks, invested in low-risk funds, and acquired government bonds. Clara had become more than my lawyer. She was the daughter I had always wanted to have, the person who listened to me without judging, who treated me as an equal instead of a foolish old woman. One Thursday afternoon, as we reviewed the bylaws for the future Eleanor Hope Foundation, Clara put down her pen and looked me directly in the eye. Mrs. Johnson, I have to ask you something personal. Don't you feel any guilt? I mean, not telling your children about the money. I thought for several minutes before answering. Clara, for 50 years of marriage, I cooked, cleaned, raised his children, cared for their sick father, worked cleaning other people's homes to help with expenses, and all that time, George made me believe we were poor while he amassed a fortune behind my back. I paused to take a sip of the tea Clara always made for me during our meetings. My children have inherited that mentality. They see me as an economic burden, as a problem to be solved. They came to my house without even greeting me to convince me to sell the only thing I had left. They didn't come for love. They came for money. Clara nodded slowly. So, no, I continued. I don't feel guilt. I feel justice. For the first time in my life, I have the power to decide who deserves my affection and who deserves my money, and I've decided they are different things. That night, while having dinner alone in my kitchen, I received a call from Olivia. Her voice sounded sweeter than usual, almost syrupy. Mom, how are you? We've missed you. Have you? I asked. Of course. Hey, Mom. We've been thinking. Maybe we were a little abrupt the other day. How about we come this weekend and cook together like before? We could talk more calmly about everything. I hung up the phone and smiled. It was funny how time had changed things. Before, a call like that would have moved me to tears. Now, it simply confirmed that it was time to execute the next step of my plan. On Friday morning, I called Clara. It's time for my children to meet the new Eleanor. I told her. Are you sure? Once we do this, there will be no turning back. Clara, dear, I replied. I've been waiting 72 years not to turn back. On Saturday, they arrived again, but this time with a completely different attitude. Olivia brought flowers from the local market, those cheap daisies she knew I liked when I was young. Ethan was carrying a bottle of mid-shelf California Merlot, the kind that costs $15 and that he considered a generous gift for his poor mother. Mom, you look great, Olivia said, giving me a kiss on the cheek that I hadn't felt in years. Have you done something different? You look more rested. Sophia and Mark also came, but this time they behaved like polite guests instead of property appraisers. Mark even complimented the garden, although the week before he had called it a mess that devalued the property. I prepared a special meal, slow-roasted leg of lamb with rosemary and potatoes, the dish they liked most when they were children. While I cooked, they moved around the house with the forced familiarity of someone trying to repair years of neglect in one afternoon. Mom, this house has a lot of potential, Ethan said, checking the windows as if he really cared about their condition. With a few small repairs, it could be worth much more than we thought. During lunch, the conversation was carefully polite. They asked about my health, about the neighbors, about things they had never cared about before. But I could see the anxiety in their eyes, the way they exchanged glances when they thought I wasn't noticing. After dessert, Olivia finally worked up the courage to address the topic that had truly brought them. Mom, we've been thinking a lot about what we talked about last week. And maybe we were too hasty. Hasty? I asked, serving coffee in the same good cups as the previous week. Ethan cleared his throat. What Olivia means is that maybe we didn't consider all the options. This house is your home, and we want you to be happy. But, Sophia quickly added, we also want to make sure you are safe and comfortable. We've thought that maybe we could help you with the necessary repairs. Mark nodded with feigned enthusiasm. Exactly. I know very good contractors who could fix the leaks, renovate the kitchen, modernize the electrical system, all without you having to worry about the costs. Without me having to worry about the costs? I repeated, savoring every word. And who would pay for those repairs? Ethan and Olivia exchanged another quick glance. It was Olivia who had been chosen to deliver the final blow. Well, Mom, we could make an investment in the property. Let's say we put money toward the improvements, and in exchange you make us co-owners. That way the house would still be yours, but we would have a guarantee that our investment is protected. There it was. The real plan. They didn't want me to sell the house because they had discovered it was worth more than they initially thought. Now they wanted to take possession of it while I was still alive, ensuring that when I died, they would be the sole legal heirs. Co-owners, I repeated slowly. And what percentage of the property would you two have? Well, Ethan said with that false smile he had inherited from his father, it would depend on how much we invest. But we were thinking of something equitable. Maybe 60% for you and 40% divided between the two of us. 40%. Of my own house, the house I had cleaned, maintained, and lived in for decades. The house I had worked like a slave for while George hid millions underground. That's a very generous offer, I finally said. Let me think about it. But Mark, perhaps because he was nervous or because he didn't understand the nuances of family manipulation, couldn't contain himself. The truth is, Eleanor, we would all win. You would have a renovated house without spending a dime. And we would have a secure real estate investment. With the current market, this property could double its value in 5 years. The silence that followed was so thick it could be chewed. Sophia shot her husband a look that could have melted steel. Ethan closed his eyes as if he had just witnessed a car accident. Olivia turned pale as a ghost. Mark had just confessed that it wasn't about my well-being, but a real estate investment. A secure investment, I repeated with a calm that surprised me. Do you know what I find curious? For 50 years, your father made me believe we didn't have money for investments, that we were too poor to risk our savings in the real estate market. I got up and walked to the window, the same one from which I had watched their arrival. But it turns out that George was very good with investments. So good that he managed to accumulate a considerable fortune without me knowing. Mom, what are you talking about? Olivia asked, her voice becoming high-pitched with anxiety. I turned to look at them. 4 prosperous, well-dressed adults with important jobs and solid bank accounts, sitting in my humble living room like vultures waiting for an old woman to die so they could claim her spoils. I'm talking about the fact that your father lied to me for decades. And you have inherited his talent for manipulation. Ethan stood up abruptly. Mom, I think you're confused. Dad never had money hidden. We checked all his papers after the funeral. All his papers? I asked with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Are you sure about that? I took a folder I had carefully prepared from my purse. Inside were copies of some documents, 3 shares of ExxonMobil, a certificate of deposit for $100,000, and a photograph of the largest gold bar I had found. I handed them to Ethan, who reviewed them with eyes that grew wider and wider. Then he passed them to Olivia, whose face had lost all color. Where did you find this? She whispered. Where your father hid them, I replied. In the place where it all started. Sophia, with her experience in wealth management, was the first to understand the implications. Eleanor, these documents, if they are authentic, they represent a considerable amount of money. Considerable? I laughed for the first time all afternoon. Dear Sophia, this is just a small sample. Mark had recovered his speech. A sample? You mean there's more? Much more, I confirmed. Your father turned out to be an exceptional investor. Stocks, bonds, properties, gold, foreign accounts, tens of millions of dollars he accumulated while I lived like a beggar. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the ticking of the wall clock, the distant rumble of traffic on the road, my own heart beating with a calm I hadn't felt in years. Ethan was the first to react, and his reaction was exactly what I had expected. Mom, this is incredible. Do you realize what this means? We are rich. The family is rich. Olivia had stood up and was pacing back and forth across the living room like a caged animal. I can't believe it. Dad lied to all of us. Why? Why did he hide all this? Perhaps, I said with a voice that sounded strangely serene, because he knew exactly what kind of people you were. These words fell like stones into a silent pond. The tension in the room could be cut with a knife. Ethan stood motionless with the documents in his hands, as if they were bombs about to explode. Olivia had stopped pacing and was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. A mixture of shock, greed, and something that might have been fear. What do you mean by that? Ethan asked with a voice that tried to sound firm but trembled at the edges. I sat down in my favorite armchair, the same one where I had spent so many nights alone watching television while they lived their prosperous lives in New York. For the first time in decades, I felt like I was in control of my own living room. I mean, my son, that your father knew you very well. He knew that if you ever discovered we had money, you wouldn't come to visit me out of love. You would come for the inheritance. Sophia remained very still, with the calculated stillness of financial professionals when they detect a business opportunity. Eleanor, with all due respect, I think you're being a little unfair. Your children love you. They were just worried about your well-being. I laughed. It wasn't a bitter or sarcastic laugh. It was a genuine laugh, the first I'd had in months. My well-being? Sophia, dear, in the 3 years since George died, do you know how many times my children have come to visit me without asking for anything in return? I waited. The silence stretched like a rubber band about to break. 0, I continued. 0 times. Every visit has been because they needed me to watch the grandchildren while they went on vacation, or because they wanted me to lend them money they never returned, or because they had some plan to improve my life that coincidentally benefited them. Mark had started to sweat despite the November chill. As a crypto expert, he understood the real value of what he was seeing better than anyone. Eleanor, maybe we should talk about how to manage all this. It's a considerable fortune and needs professional planning. Professional planning? I repeated. Like the one you made an hour ago when you wanted to become co-owners of my house? Olivia finally found her voice. Mom, it's okay. Maybe we didn't handle the house situation well. But this changes everything. With this money, you could do anything you wanted. You could travel, buy nice clothes, live like a queen. Like a queen? I slowly rose from my armchair. Olivia, dear, for 72 years I've lived like a servant. First to your father, then to you. Do you know the last time I spent money on myself? When was the last time I bought something that wasn't food or medicine? None of them answered because none of them knew the answer, because they had never bothered to ask. It was 8 years ago, I told them. I bought a dress for the neighbor's daughter's wedding. It cost $30, and I felt guilty for weeks for having spent it. Ethan had sat down again and was looking at the documents as if they might disappear if he looked away. Mom, we understand you're angry, but now we can fix everything. We can be a real family. A real family? The phrase came out with more force than I had intended. Like when you left me alone in the hospital when I broke my hip. Like when you didn't come to my 70th birthday. Like when Olivia told me on the phone that it was too depressing to visit me because I complained too much. Olivia turned tomato red. I never said that. You did, I confirmed with a terrible calm. It was March 15th of last year. A Tuesday afternoon. You called to cancel your Sunday visit and told me verbatim, Mom, every time we come to see you, you just complain about your aches and problems. The kids leave there depressed. Silence filled everything again. I could see Olivia trying to remember that conversation, how her face fell when she realized I was right. Mark tried to change the subject. Well, the past is the past. The important thing now is the future. Eleanor, with this fortune, you could help the whole family. The grandchildren could go to the best universities. We could expand our businesses. Help the whole family? I interrupted. Are you referring to the same family that an hour ago wanted to take 40% of my house? Sophia cleared her throat. Eleanor, I think there was a misunderstanding. The house thing was a poorly planned proposal. Obviously, with these new developments, the situation is completely different. Completely different. I repeated. Of course it's different. An hour ago, I was a poor old woman who needed your help to survive. Now I am a rich old woman from whom you can benefit. Ethan carefully placed the documents on the coffee table as if they were explosives. Mom, it's not fair for you to say that. We love you regardless of the money. Really? I approached him until we were face to face. Then tell me, Ethan, when was the last time you called me just to ask how I was? Not to ask me to watch the kids, not to tell me your problems, just to know if I was okay. I watched his mind work desperately, searching for an answer that didn't exist. You can't remember, I continued, because it's never happened. In 3 years, not a single call out of pure love. Olivia had sat on the edge of the sofa with her hands clasped. Mom, I'm sorry. I know we haven't been the best children, but we can change. Everything can be different now. Now that you know I have money? No, she quickly said. Now that we've realized our mistakes. I turned toward the window again. Outside, the leaves of the oak trees swayed in the November wind. That wind that had always seemed melancholy to me, but today sounded like music. Do you know what the saddest thing about all this is? I said without turning around. For years, I waited for exactly this conversation. I waited for the day you would come and tell me you had been unfair to me, that you loved me, that you regretted treating me like a burden. I paused, enjoying the expectant silence. But now that it's finally happening, I realize it's only because you've smelled the money. It's as if you came to mourn over a grave, but only because someone told you there was gold buried underneath. Mark tried one last time. Eleanor, I understand you're hurt, but think about it practically. With that fortune, you could secure the future of the whole family. The grandchildren would never have financial problems. They could study wherever they wanted, become whatever they dreamed of. The grandchildren, I repeated thoughtfully. Maria is 15 and Paul is 12. Do you know how many times they have come to see me this year? Again, that awkward silence. Once, I answered myself. In July, when you went to Martha's Vineyard and needed someone to watch them for free for a week. Sophia shifted in her seat. The children are very busy with their studies, their extracurricular activities. The children are busy, I interrupted, because you taught them that I am not important, that Grandma is someone to be visited out of obligation, not out of affection. I turned to look at them one last time. 4 adults dressed in expensive clothes, worried about their investments and their crypto, their pension funds and their future plans. 4 people who had shared my blood and my roof, but who had never shared my heart. I think it's time for you to leave, I said with a tranquility that surprised me. What? Ethan stood up alarmed. Mom, we can't leave like this. We have to talk about this, make plans. No, I said firmly. We don't have to do anything. I have something to do. And you have to go. Over the next 3 weeks, my phone didn't stop ringing. Ethan called me every morning as if it were his new full-time job. Olivia sent long text messages full of excuses and promises of change. Mark sent me detailed financial analyses on the best ways to invest our family estate. Sophia sent me brochures of luxury homes where I could live with the comfort I deserve. But I had made a decision that was more solid than any stock market investment. On Monday morning, I called Clara and told her it was time to execute the final plan. For weeks, we had been working on the legal documents, transferring assets, and establishing the foundation structure. Everything was ready. Are you completely sure, Mrs. Johnson? Clara asked me one last time. Once we make this public, there will be no way to turn back. Clara, dear, I replied as I poured myself a cup of the most expensive coffee I had ever bought. I've waited 72 years not to have to turn back ever again. That afternoon, Clara arrived at my house accompanied by a notary, 2 official witnesses, and a local reporter from the Harrisburg newspaper. Alice Brown from the bank also came, having insisted on being present to certify the authenticity of all the financial documents. I signed the new will at my kitchen table, the same table where I had eaten alone for 3 years, where I had cried in silence while my children lived their prosperous lives. Each signature felt like an act of liberation, as if I were signing my own Declaration of Independence. Then I called my children. I summoned them for an urgent family meeting on Saturday at 2 in the afternoon. I told them I had made important decisions about my estate and needed to communicate them personally. They arrived punctually for the first time in years. Ethan brought a folder full of documents he had probably been preparing all week. Olivia was wearing a new dress, the kind you buy when you want to impress someone with money. Mark and Sophia seemed to have rehearsed their most serious and professional expressions. I sat them down in the living room, in the same places where they had been 3 weeks earlier when they tried to appropriate my house. This time, I didn't offer them coffee or cookies. This time, I had absolute control of the situation. "Thank you for coming." I began with a formality I had never used with them before. "As you know, I discovered that your father left me a considerable estate, $25 million in total, between cash, investments, properties, and gold." Mark whistled softly. Even knowing the approximate figure, hearing it said aloud had a different impact. "During these weeks," I continued, "I have been reflecting on what to do with this fortune. I have consulted with lawyers, financial advisors, and estate planning experts, and I have reached a conclusion." Ethan leaned forward with that barely concealed eagerness I had seen so many times when he talked about his own stock market investments. "I have decided to create a foundation," I announced. "It will be called the Eleanor Hope Foundation, in honor of my mother. Its objective will be to provide housing, food, and legal assistance to elderly women who have been abandoned, mistreated, or manipulated by their families." The silence that followed was different from all the others. It was not the silence of surprise or discomfort. It was the silence of absolute shock. Olivia was the first to react. "Mom, are you saying you're going to give all the money away?" "I'm not giving it away," I corrected. "I'm going to invest it in something that truly matters. In women who have lived what I have lived, who have been treated as I have been treated." Ethan stood up abruptly. "This is insane. You can't just throw $25 million out the window." "Throw it out the window?" I repeated with a calm that took me years to perfect. "Is that what you think of helping women who have suffered financial and emotional abuse?" Sophia intervened with her professional wealth management voice. "Eleanor, we understand the philanthropic impulse, but perhaps you could consider a more balanced distribution. You could donate a portion to charity and reserve another part for the family." "The family?" I laughed. "Are you referring to the same family that wanted to take 40% of my house a month ago?" Mark had pulled out his phone and was frantically running calculations. "Eleanor, think about it. With $25 million, you could secure the future of all of us. The grandchildren would never have money problems. They could study at Harvard, become multimillionaires. The grandchildren," I said slowly, "who have come to see me once all year. The grandchildren you have taught that I am not worth their time." Olivia had started to cry, but they were tears of frustration, not sadness. "Mom, please. I know we've made mistakes, but we are your family. We are your blood. My blood." I approached her until we were face to face. "Olivia, my blood is what I shed working like a slave to give you a better life. My blood is what I lost every time you treated me like trash. You are my children, but you stopped being my family a long time ago." Ethan had started pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "This can't be legal. You can't be in your right mind if you're giving away a fortune." I took a folder I had prepared specifically for this moment from my purse. "Legal? Ethan, dear, everything is perfectly legal. I have passed psychological evaluations. I have had multiple medical consultations certifying my mental capacity. I have worked with the best lawyers in Pennsylvania." I handed him the folder. Inside were copies of all the documents: the new will, the foundation's articles of incorporation, the medical evaluations, the bank transfers already executed. "In fact," I continued as he reviewed the documents with increasingly desperate eyes, "I have already transferred $15 million to the foundation's accounts. The process is irreversible." Mark dropped his phone, 15 million? Already? 15 million, I confirmed. The other 10 million will be transferred automatically when I die, along with this house, which will become the Foundation's first shelter. Sophia had turned very pale. As a financial professional, she understood the magnitude of what she was hearing better than anyone. Eleanor, this means that— It means, I interrupted, that you will not inherit a single dollar. Not one. The impact of those words was like a bomb in the room. Ethan slumped onto the sofa as if he had been shot. Olivia continued crying, but now they were the choked sobs of real panic. Mark was staring into space as if he had just witnessed the end of the world. Sophia had started reviewing the documents with the desperation of someone looking for an emergency exit in a burning building. You can't do this, Ethan mumbled. You can't punish us for a lifetime because of a few mistakes. A few mistakes? I sat down in my favorite armchair, feeling for the first time in decades that it truly was my throne. Ethan, you have treated me like trash for years. These are not mistakes. It is your nature. Olivia wiped her tears with the back of her hand, leaving mascara smudges on her expensive dress. Mom, if it's money you want, we can give it to you. Mark and I have savings, investments. Money? I laughed with a bitterness I had been saving for decades. Olivia, dear, I just gave up $25 million. Do you really think this is about money? Then what is it about? Ethan shouted with a desperation I had never seen in him. I slowly stood up and walked toward the front door. I opened it wide, letting the cold November air into my house like a blessing. It is about, I said with a voice that resonated in every corner of the room, dignity. It is about a 72-year-old woman who has finally learned to value herself. Now, I added, pointing toward the open door, get out of my house, and never come back. They never came back. No calls, no messages, no surprise visits. It was as if they had decided I had died the day I took away the inheritance. During the first few weeks, I confess I waited for some attempt at reconciliation, some sign that perhaps, just perhaps, some real love remained beneath all the greed. But nothing came, just a silence that spread like an oil slick, confirming what I already knew in my heart. They had never loved me for who I was, only for what they could get from me. Clara came to visit me twice a week to check on the Foundation's progress. She had become the daughter I had always dreamed of having, intelligent, affectionate, genuinely interested in my well-being without ulterior motives. We drank tea in my kitchen while planning the details of the shelter that would be built where my family home once stood. Mrs. Johnson, she said one afternoon while we reviewed the architectural plans, don't you feel any sadness about all this? After all, they were your children. I placed my cup on the table and looked out the window at the garden where I had found my liberation buried beneath the earth. Clara, do you know the moment I stopped feeling sad? She shook her head, awaiting my answer. It was when I realized I had been crying for years over people who no longer existed. The sweet children I raised, who hugged me when they had nightmares, who told me they loved me. Those children died a long time ago. The adults who came to my house these past few weeks were strangers who shared their DNA, but not their heart. Clara nodded with understanding. And the grandchildren? Don't you miss them? That question hurt more than I had expected. Maria and Paul. I had watched them grow up from babies. I had been the one who cared for them during their early years while their parents built their successful careers. I remembered Maria at 5, curled up in my lap while I read her princess stories. I remembered Paul teaching me how to use his favorite video game with that infinite patience only children have. I miss them terribly, I admitted, but their parents have made sure they see me as the crazy grandmother who gave away her inheritance. They've probably told them I'm a selfish, bitter woman. What if you tried to contact them directly? I shook my head. It wouldn't be fair to them. They are at an age where they need stability, not more family conflict. Maybe when they are older, they will understand why I did what I did. Or maybe not. But at least they will know that their grandmother found a way to help other women who suffered what she suffered. The construction of the shelter began in January. Watching the walls of my old house being demolished should have been painful, but instead, it felt like a metamorphosis. Every falling wall was a broken chain. Every disappearing room was a toxic memory fading forever. The new building would be modern, but cozy, with individual rooms for 12 women, a communal kitchen, a library, a therapeutic garden, and offices for the psychological and legal support staff, all financed with the money George had hidden while making me believe we were poor. The irony was not lost on me. The man who had lied to me for decades had unknowingly provided the means for my liberation and that of other women like me. In March, while supervising the installation of the shelter's windows, I received an unexpected visit. A family sedan stopped in front of the construction site, and out stepped Maria, my 15-year-old granddaughter. She was taller than I remembered, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing her private school uniform. She walked toward me with that determination that strong women inherit, the same one it had taken me 70 years to find. "Grandma," she said simply. "Maria," I replied, feeling my heart race. "How did you get all the way out here?" "By bus from New York. I told Mom I was going to a friend's house to study." We stood looking at each other for a moment that felt eternal. She had grown so much she was no longer the little girl I remembered, but in her green eyes, the same as her grandfather's, I could see something that gave me hope. "Do you want me to show you what we are building?" I asked. We spent the next hour walking through the construction site as I explained the purpose of the shelter. I told her about the women who would come to live there. Women who had been mistreated, abandoned, manipulated by people who were supposed to love them. Maria listened in silence, asking occasional questions that showed surprising maturity for her 15 years. "Grandma," she finally said, when we sat on a makeshift bench made of construction planks, "Dad and Mom told me you had gone crazy, that you gave away all the money out of spite. And what do you think?" Maria looked toward the building under construction, toward the workers carefully installing each window, each door, every detail that would make this place a home for women who had lost theirs. "I think," she said slowly, "that it's the sanest thing I've ever seen an adult do." I felt the tears start to form in my eyes. "Do you really think that?" "Grandma, I hear them talk. Dad and Mom, Uncle Ethan and Aunt Sophia. They talk about you like you're a foolish old woman who doesn't know how to handle money. But I've also heard them talk about how much money they expected to inherit, about how they were going to invest your fortune in their businesses." She paused, looking me directly in the eye. "I never defended you when they spoke badly of you. I'm really ashamed. But I didn't. I thought maybe they were right, that maybe you were too old to understand modern things. And now I see this." She pointed to the shelter. "And I understand that you're the only one who really understands what matters." We hugged for the first time in years, and in that embrace, I felt something I had lost long ago, the hope that maybe, just maybe, I had planted some good seeds in my family after all. "Will you come visit me when the shelter is finished?" I asked. "Of course," she replied without hesitation. "And when I turn 18 and can make my own decisions, I want to come and volunteer here. Are you sure? Your parents won't approve." Maria stood up and brushed the dust off her uniform skirt. "Grandma, I learned something today. Sometimes you have to disappoint people so you don't disappoint yourself." As I watched her walk away toward the bus stop, I knew it had been worth it. All of it. The loneliness, the pain, the family rupture, the relinquishing of the fortune. It had all been worth it for that moment, for that conversation, for knowing that at least one person of my blood understood why I had done what I had done. That night, for the first time since George's death, I fell asleep smiling. The shelter opened its doors in September, just as the leaves of the oak trees began to change color. I had chosen the date deliberately. Autumn had always seemed to me the season of new beginnings, when nature sheds the old to prepare for rebirth. The first 5 women arrived the same week. Carol, 68, had been thrown out of her house by her son after he discovered she had spent some of her savings on medicine for her diabetes. Margaret, 73, had lived for 2 years in her car after her daughter-in-law convinced her son to sell the family home without consulting her. Phyllis, 65, had been the victim of phone scams that stole her entire Social Security check, while her family blamed her for being too trusting. Each story was a mirror of my own experience. Each woman a reflection of the Eleanor I had been before finding the buried fortune. Listening to them, I understood that George's money had not only freed me from poverty, it had given me the tool to free others. I hired an extraordinary team for the shelter. Dr. Helena Reyes, a psychologist specializing in elder abuse, who had worked for years with victims of domestic violence. Dr. Marcus Klein, a geriatrician who offered free medical consultations twice a week, and Martha Davis, a social worker who handled the legal and social reintegration aspects. But the most special person on the team was Hope Miller, a 55-year-old woman who had gone through a situation similar to mine. Her husband had abandoned her after 30 years of marriage, taking all the savings and leaving her homeless. Her children, embarrassed by the scandal, had cut her out of their lives completely. Hope had become the unofficial director of the shelter, the person the new residents turned to when they needed understanding more than professional advice. She had that wisdom that only comes from overcoming suffering, that capacity to listen without judging that is more valuable than any university degree. One October afternoon, while we were having tea in the new communal kitchen, Hope asked me a question that left me thinking for days. "Eleanor, do you ever wonder if your children are okay? I mean financially, without the inheritance they expected." The question caught me off guard. For months, I had been so focused on my new life, on the shelter, on helping other women, that I had managed not to think too much about Ethan and Olivia. "The truth is," I replied, "I know they are fine. Ethan earns over $100,000 a year managing investment funds. Olivia is married to Mark, who has millions in crypto and properties. They never needed my money to survive. But maybe they needed it to dream?" Hope suggested with that gentleness that characterized all her observations. Dream of what? Of being multimillionaires? Of having so much money they never had to worry about anything? "Maybe," Hope said, slowly stirring her tea. "They dreamed of the security that only comes from knowing your family has your back, that there will always be a safety net." Her words haunted me for weeks. Had I been too harsh? Had I mistaken justice for vengeance? Was it possible that my children, despite all their flaws, had also had legitimate fears about the future? The answer came unexpectedly in November, when Clara came to visit me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before. She looked uncomfortable, as if she had bad news to deliver. "Mrs. Johnson," she began as she sat down in my new living room, "I received a call from a lawyer in New York. He represents your children." I felt a knot in my stomach. What do they want now? "They are trying to contest the will. They allege you were not of sound mind when you made the decisions about the inheritance. They have filed a lawsuit requesting that the transfer of funds to the foundation be declared null and void." I remained silent for several minutes, processing the information. After everything that had happened, after seeing the good we were doing at the shelter, after the women who had found a new opportunity in life, my children still wanted to destroy everything for money. "Do they have any chance of winning?" I finally asked. Clara shook her head. "Practically none. We have all the psychological evaluations, multiple medical testimonies, exhaustive documentation of the entire process. Besides, the shelter is already operating, the transfers were made months ago, and there is a complete public record of all transactions. But they're going to try anyway." "Yes. And the legal process will probably last months, maybe years." That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the shelter's halls, listening to the soft sounds of women sleeping peacefully for the first time in years. Carol had started cooking for everyone, discovering a culinary passion that had been buried under decades of cooking just to survive. Margaret had begun giving sewing classes to the other residents, teaching skills she had perfected over 50 years of mending old clothes instead of buying new ones. How dared my children threaten this? How could they look at what we had built and see only a bank account that had been denied to them? The answer came a week later, when Maria appeared at my door again. This time she hadn't traveled alone. She brought Paul, my 12-year-old grandson, who had grown so much since I last saw him that I barely recognized him. "Grandma," Maria said without preamble, "we need to talk to you about the lawsuit." The three of us sat in the shelter's garden, where we had planted rose bushes that would bloom in the spring. Paul seemed nervous, fiddling with his jacket sleeves while Maria took the lead in the conversation. "We know what Dad and Mom are trying to do," she began, "and we want you to know that we don't agree." Paul nodded vigorously. "It's super unfair, Grandma. This," he pointed toward the building where the shelter women were starting to prepare the communal dinner, is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Do your parents know you're here? I asked. Maria shook her head. And they'll probably ground us when they find out. But we don't care. Grandma, Paul said with a seriousness inappropriate for his 12 years. Is it true that Grandpa hid all that money without telling you? It's true, I confirmed. And is it true that Dad and Mom never visited you until they found out about the money? That's also true. Paul and Maria exchanged a look that painfully reminded me of when they were little and conspired to cause mischief. Then, Maria said, we want to do something. She pulled a folder decorated with drawings of flowers from her backpack. Inside were documents she had clearly printed from the internet. Legal forms she had filled out in her careful adolescent handwriting. These are papers for legal emancipation, she explained. When I turn 18, I can file for legal independence from my parents. And Paul can petition for an alternative guardian when he turns 14. I was speechless. Maria, you can't do that. You are too young, and no matter how angry you are at your parents, we're not angry, Paul interrupted. We're ashamed. The other day I heard Dad talking on the phone with his lawyer, Maria added. He said that if he managed to annul the will, he could recover at least $10 million. He talked about investing the money in new funds, about buying properties abroad. Not once, Paul continued. Not once did I hear him say he missed you, or that he was worried about you. He only talked about money. I hugged them both, feeling a mix of pride and sadness that filled my chest. Pride at seeing that they had grown up with values their parents seemed to have lost. Sadness at knowing that their innocence was being destroyed by the greed of the adults who were supposed to protect them. You are not going to emancipate yourselves, I told them firmly. But there is something you can do for me. What? Be better than them. When you are adults, remember this moment. Remember what it feels like when the people you love value you only for what they can get from you. And promise me you will never do that to anyone. Maria took my hand with the solemnity of someone taking a sacred oath. I promise, Grandma. Paul nodded with the same seriousness. I promise too. As I watched them walk away that afternoon, I knew my children's lawsuit didn't matter. I had already won something far more valuable than any legal battle. I had ensured that the next generation understood the difference between price and value, between having and being. The war for my inheritance would continue, but I had already found my peace. The lawsuit dragged on for 8 months, each hearing more pathetic than the last. Ethan and Olivia hired one of the most expensive law firms in New York, paying with money they could have used for something useful, like visiting their mother out of genuine love instead of greed. Their lawyers presented evidence of my supposed mental incapacity, testimonies from neighbors who said they had seen me talking to myself in the garden, old medical reports mentioning episodes of sadness after George's death, even photographs of my house before the renovation that tried to demonstrate I lived in conditions inadequate for rational decision-making. It was grotesque to see how they distorted every aspect of my life to construct a portrait of senility that justified stripping me of the right to decide over my own estate. The lowest point came when my children's lawyer, a man in an expensive suit with a shark smile named Attorney Gerald Hayes, cross-examined me for 4 hours, trying to confuse me about dates, numbers, and financial details. He thought he could make me look like a confused old woman who had been manipulated by unscrupulous advisors. Mrs. Johnson, he said with that condescension some men reserve for older women, can you explain to the court why you chose to donate $25 million to complete strangers instead of your own family? I stared at him for a long moment, feeling Clara's presence beside me, the strength given to me by the women of the shelter who had come to support me, and the absolute certainty that I was right. Mr. Hayes? I replied in a voice that resonated throughout the room. I didn't donate it to complete strangers. I donated it to women who have lived exactly what I lived, being treated as burdens, as objects, as investments that did not yield the expected return. I paused to look directly at Ethan and Olivia, who were sitting in the front row avoiding my gaze. My children visited me twice in 3 years, both times to ask for something. The first time they wanted me to sell my house so they could split the money. The second time, when they discovered their father's inheritance, they wanted to take 40% of my property as an investment. Not once did they ask how I was feeling, if I needed company, If my health was okay. The silence in the room was absolute. The women at the shelter, I continued, call me every day to ask how I am. They hug me when I'm sad. They celebrate my small joys as if they were their own. They have given me more love in 6 months than my children have in 6 years. So, yes, Mr. Hayes, I chose to donate my fortune to people who value me for who I am, not for what I can give them. Does that sound like the decision of a mentally incapacitated woman? Gerald Hayes tried to recover by asking questions about the external influences that had affected my decision, suggesting that Clara and the other professionals at the shelter had manipulated me for personal gain. Clara then stood up and asked permission to speak. With impressive calm, she explained to the court that she had given up her salary as a private lawyer to work for half her usual rate at the foundation, that all team members had made financial sacrifices to be part of the project. Your Honor, she said, addressing the judge, if we were manipulating Mrs. Johnson for our benefit, we would have chosen a far less efficient method of getting rich. The room filled with contained laughter, and I saw Ethan's face turn red with humiliation. The most devastating testimony came from an unexpected source, Maria. My granddaughter had turned 16 during the legal process and had formally requested to testify as an independent witness. When she took the stand, she was wearing the same blue dress I had worn at my wedding, which I had kept for decades and which she had found in my things. She had tailored it to fit perfectly, and seeing her there, representing the continuity of something good amidst so much family destruction, almost made me cry. Your Honor, she began in a clear, firm voice, I want to talk about my parents' relationship with my grandmother. For the next 20 minutes, Maria systematically demolished all of her parents' arguments. She described the conversations she had overheard about taking advantage of Grandma's age, the calculations they had made about the value of her house, the times they had canceled visits because they didn't have time to deal with her complaints. My parents, she said, looking directly at Ethan and Olivia, only showed interest in Grandma when they found out she had money. Before that, they talked about her as if she were an annoying obligation. When my children's lawyer tried to discredit her testimony by suggesting she was too young to understand family complexities, Maria answered him with a phrase that was forever etched in my memory. Mr. Hayes, maybe I'm too young to understand legal complexities, but I'm not too young to understand the difference between love and greed. The judge, a woman in her 50s named Judge Eleanor Sullivan, listened to all the testimonies with the patience of someone who had seen enough family drama to write several books. When the time came for her verdict, 3 weeks later, the courtroom was packed with journalists who had followed the case as if it were a soap opera. The court has thoroughly reviewed all the evidence presented, Judge Sullivan began. The medical and psychological reports clearly demonstrate that Mrs. Eleanor Johnson is of sound mind. Her decisions, while they may seem unconventional from a traditional economic perspective, are perfectly grounded in her personal values and life experiences. She paused to look at Ethan and Olivia. Furthermore, this court finds it particularly revealing that the plaintiffs have not presented a single piece of evidence that they were concerned with their mother's well-being before discovering her estate. The pattern of behavior described by multiple witnesses suggests that their interest in contesting the will is motivated by economic gain, not by genuine filial concern. The sentence was conclusive. The lawsuit was completely dismissed, with court costs that my children would have to pay. More importantly, the judge ordered that the complete case file be made public, turning the entire sordidness of their behavior into a matter of public record. When we left the courthouse, a crowd of journalists awaited us. Clara had prepared a brief statement, but I took the microphone and spoke from the heart. For 70 years, I said, looking directly into the cameras, I believed that my worth as a person depended on what I could give to others. Today I have learned that my worth comes from who I am, not what I have. I hope, I continued, that other women my age who are watching this understand that it is never too late to value yourselves, that it is never too late to say no to those who treat you as objects instead of people. That night, in my new room at the shelter, which I had decided to make my permanent home, I received over 200 phone calls and emails from women across the country who wanted to tell me their own stories of family mistreatment. Each call was a reminder of why I had done the right thing. Each story was a confirmation that my experience was not unique, that there were thousands of women living the same nightmare of being valued only for what they could provide. One of those calls particularly struck me. It was from a woman named Dolores, 75, who lived in Boston. Her story was so similar to mine, it seemed like an echo. A husband who had hidden a considerable fortune, children who only visited when they needed money, grandchildren who had learned to see her as a burden. "Eleanor," she said in a voice broken by years of contained tears, "hearing you on TV has given me hope for the first time in years. Do you think I could also find the courage to change my life?" "Dolores," I replied, "I believe you already have that courage. You just need to give yourself permission to use it." 3 weeks later, Dolores became the 10th resident of the shelter. She had sold her house in Boston, donated most of the money to the foundation, and moved to rural Pennsylvania to start a new life at 75. Seeing her arrive with her 2 suitcases and a timid but hopeful smile confirmed something I had begun to suspect. This was only the beginning. The shelter's story had touched something deep in American society. We were receiving applications from women all over the country, donations from people who wanted to support the cause, and offers of help from professionals who wanted to be part of something meaningful. But most important of all was that I had demonstrated, both to myself and to the world, that a 72-year-old woman could completely reinvent her life. She could go from victim to hero, from object to subject, from slave to liberator. And that, I realized as I fell asleep that night to the soft sounds of women who had found a home, was worth more than all the crypto and stocks in the world. 2 years after the trial, my life had found a rhythm I had never experienced before. I woke up every morning not because I had obligations to fulfill or people to satisfy, but because I was eager to live the day that was beginning. The shelter had grown beyond my most ambitious dreams. It now permanently housed 20 women and had expanded its services to include external consultations for 50 more who lived in their own homes but needed psychological or legal support. Carol, who had arrived as a woman shattered by her son's betrayal, had become the shelter's official chef. Her kitchen had transformed into the heart of the place, where the aromas of traditional American comfort food mingled with the laughter of women who had rediscovered the joy of eating without guilt, of cooking for pleasure instead of obligation. Margaret had opened a sewing workshop that not only taught residents to repair and create clothes, but had started selling their products at local markets. The income went entirely to the foundation, but more important than the money was the pride I saw in the eyes of these women when someone bought something they had made with their own hands. Hope had developed a mentorship program that connected new residents with women who had already completed their recovery process. Watching a 70-year-old woman teach another 65-year-old how to open her first independent bank account, or how to apply for a job for the first time in decades, was witnessing daily miracles of restored dignity. But perhaps the most significant project had emerged from an idea that Maria had proposed during one of her regular visits. She now came every weekend from New York, and Paul accompanied her whenever he could escape his parents' watch. "Grandma," she had told me one afternoon as we walked through the garden we had planted together, "what will happen to all these women's stories? How will what they've been through be remembered?" That question gave birth to the Rescued Memories Archive, a project that documented the life experiences of every woman who passed through the shelter. They were not only testimonies of suffering, but complete narratives that included their triumphs, their dreams, their accumulated wisdom, their family recipes, their favorite songs, everything that made them whole people instead of merely victims. Maria had learned to use professional recording equipment and had become the project's lead archivist. She had a natural talent for making the women feel comfortable sharing their stories, perhaps because she herself had experienced the pain of seeing a loved one treated unfairly. One spring afternoon, as we reviewed the transcripts of the latest interviews, Maria asked me a question that left me thinking for weeks. "Grandma, do you ever regret losing Mom and Dad over this?" It was a question I had been avoiding confronting directly for 2 years. The honest answer was complicated. "I miss the children they were," I finally told her. "I miss the 5-year-old Ethan who used to hug me when there was a storm. I miss the 7-year-old Olivia who brought me flowers from the garden because she thought I was sad. But do you miss the adults they became? It took me several minutes to answer. No, and that's the saddest thing of all. The adults they are now are so different from the children you raised that when you lose them, you don't exactly know what you're grieving. Maria nodded with that mature understanding she had developed too soon. And us? Paul and I? Are you afraid we'll turn into people like them? On the contrary, I smiled. You two give me hope that it is possible to break the cycles, that a person can choose to be different from the family they were born into. That conversation came at a particularly significant moment. I had just received a letter I had been waiting for, though I didn't know I was waiting for it. It was from Ethan. Not a legal demand this time, not a threat or an attempt at manipulation. It was a handwritten letter, on plain paper, without lawyer's letterhead or formal language. Mom, it began, it's been 2 years since we last spoke. 2 years in which I've had time to think about the things you said, the decisions you made, the kind of son I've been. The letter continued for 3 pages. A late but seemingly sincere confession of mistakes made, opportunities lost, love taken for granted. He didn't directly apologize. Ethan had never been good at apologizing, but he acknowledged that he had been wrong about many things. I'm not writing this expecting you to forgive me, the letter ended. I'm not writing this expecting to mend a relationship that I probably destroyed beyond repair. I'm writing this because my daughter has taught me things about you that I never bothered to learn, and because I believe I deserve to know that at least once in my life I was honest with you. Maria has told me about the shelter, about the women you help, about the difference you've made in their lives. She has made me understand that maybe I never truly knew you, that I always saw you as the person who was there for us, but never as a person with your own dreams and needs. I don't expect a reply. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand why you did what you did. And even though it hurts to admit it, I think you did the right thing. I read that letter 5 times before deciding what to do with it. I could have ignored it. I could have seen it as a late and insufficient attempt at reconciliation. I could have assumed it was another manipulation, albeit more subtle than the previous ones. Instead, I decided to do something that 2 years earlier would have been unthinkable. Nothing. I didn't reply to the letter. I didn't tear it up. I put it in my desk drawer and got on with my life. Because I had learned that not everything requires an immediate response, that some things need time to process, that forgiveness is not something that can be forced or rushed. But the simple fact that Ethan had been able to write those words was, in itself, a small victory. It meant that Maria and Paul had achieved something I never could, making their father reflect on the kind of person he had chosen to be. A week after receiving the letter, I had another important conversation, this time with Clara, who had come to dinner at the shelter as she did every Friday night. "Have you thought about your own future, Mrs. Johnson?" she asked, as we shared a traditional meatloaf and mashed potatoes that Carol had prepared to celebrate Phyllis's birthday. I mean, afterward, when you can no longer actively manage all this. It was a practical but painful question. At 74, I couldn't ignore that my time was limited, that I would eventually need to make plans to ensure the shelter continued operating without me. "I have been thinking about that," I admitted. "And I think the answer is in this room." I looked around the table, where 15 women were having dinner and conversing with the familiarity of chosen sisters. Hope, who was now 57 and had become my right-hand woman. Margaret, who had developed a business acumen that surprised even herself. Carol, whose generosity in the kitchen had extended to all aspects of her life. "I'm not going to name an external heir," I continued. "I'm going to turn the management of the shelter into a cooperative run by the women who live here. They understand better than anyone what is needed, what works, what needs to change." Clara smiled approvingly. "That is a beautiful idea, and very practical." "It's more than practical," I said. "It's fair. For decades, other people made decisions about my life without consulting me. I'm not going to do the same to these women." That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I sat on my balcony looking at the stars over Pennsylvania. The air smelled of spring and new possibilities, that unique blend of hope and satisfaction that I had learned to recognize as happiness. For the first time in 74 years of life, I was not afraid of the future. Not because I knew what was going to happen, but because I had finally learned to trust my ability to face whatever came. George's money had given me the freedom to choose. But the true fortune I had found was not buried underground. It was here, in this community of women who had transformed betrayal into solidarity, abandonment into chosen family, despair into renewed hope. And that, I thought as the stars twinkled like promises in the Pennsylvania sky, was a legacy no child could claim and no court could overturn.